PTSD is real. One of my first duty stations was in Guam guarding nuclear weapons. Long story short, when that happens, you got to keep functioning.
Wait, you saw it?
Yeah, it was right in front of me.
Oh my gosh.
So
that's traumatic.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. I locked it away like we do, right? Stuff happens, trauma comes. You got to keep functioning. You don't have time to sort of sit down and go, how did that impact me? And the next day, I think we got drunk and we kept moving. Mental health. She said, listen, it is not your fault what happened to you. It's not your fault, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's the family of origin story, whatever that is, it's not your fault. But it is your responsibility to heal.
Yeah. Can you take antidepressants and be a Christian? That's what we're talking about today.
Provocative.
With Keith Jenkins. Keith, that's a military-looking shirt. Tell me, what's your military experience? And how does that relate to maybe what we're talking about today?
Yeah, there's some correlation for sure.
Do you want to start reading or listening to the Bible, but you have no idea where to start?
I get the question all the time. I don't know the translation. I don't know where to even begin. That's why we made the 21 Days of Momentum Challenge. How many chapters are in the book of John?
21.
1 chapter a day, small podcast episode. You go through all 21 days. You take the challenge. What happens?
I think your life will be different. You will have hope for your day. You will have a security in hearing the voice of God.
So take the 21-day challenge today on the UNcomplicated app. Just look at the link in description or search your app store.
I was a U.S. Marine for 10 years. Joined when I was 16 and a half. Had to have my mom sign a waiver for me to get in. You didn't know that, did you?
I had no idea. You joined at 16 and a half?
Yeah. My birthday, I started school early, and my birthday's in September, so I was 16. My birthday, when I graduated, my birthday wasn't until September.
You must have been, I'm guessing, running from something. Why would you run to the military?
Bro, I grew up in Baltimore. There's a reason to get out of there. So, yeah, I mean, it was incredible, but the reason is because I had a little situation, and they so they had to get my mom to sign the waiver.
Oh my god!
To say I'm not going to be a druggie in the Marine
I'm learning all of this.
15 years.
If you're new to the Uncomplicated Podcast, I'll let you know I'm a pastor, and so is Keith. And not only am I a pastor, but he's my pastor. He's been my pastor for almost 15 years since before we started our church. And he's always been basically looking out for us and overseeing us because even a pastor needs a pastor. Yeah, absolutely. But some of the last conversations we've had over the last maybe 10 years together is about, can I be a Christian and take antidepressants? Because there's a lot of absolutely, you should be trusting God and you shouldn't be worrying. But the reality is, what is it? 1 out of 3 people right now are on some level of medication.
Oh my God.
And I know you have a little bit of experience with this. I have a little bit of a story too. Let's chop it up about something that I think is a real high felt need right now.
Big time.
I mean, I don't know where you want to start, but I
mean, you were talking about the military, right? And how that plays into my mental health. Well, PTSD is real.
Right.
And so I don't know if we ever talked about this, but I was stationed in Guam. One of my first duty stations was in Guam guarding nuclear weapons at 17, authorized with deadly force. Do you understand?
Gosh.
I went from Baltimore to now guarding nuclear weapons in the span of 6 months.
God bless America. Shout out to our military. Right. Wow, that's amazing.
So, long story short, there was a helicopter crash in one of our missions to bring nuclear weapons down to the ships, because that's what would happen. The ships would come into the dock. The Marines were providing support and cover and security going down from the facility to the ship. And one of the helicopters went down. And we because when that happens, you got to keep functioning.
Wait, you saw it?
Yeah, it was right in front of me.
Oh my gosh.
So
that's traumatic.
Absolutely. But here's the thing. I locked it away like we do, right? Stuff happens, trauma comes. You got to keep functioning. If you got trauma, you're a single mom, you got to keep dinner. We got to feed these kids. You don't have time to sort of sit down and go, how did that impact me? And is there, so I didn't do any of that.
That's a luxury.
The next day, I think we got drunk and we kept moving. And so I didn't even know that it was a thing until my wife and I were in Hawaii on vacation, and we walk out to the house. She wants to take a helo ride, right, in Kauai.
Helo, that's short for helicopter.
Yes, sorry, that's military jargon.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thanks. And so we're walking out, and I literally, I smelled the JP4, the fuel that they put in helicopters. It was the same smell and fuel from the helicopter crash. And immediately I start having a panic attack. I know what it is now.
Trigger.
It's a panic. Yes. And so I went on the ride, but it was horrible. Wow. It was horrible. And so when we get home, and ironically enough, I didn't go get any help. I just said, oh, I'm good, we good, and just kept moving.
Why is that ironic? You're a man. Men don't go to therapy. Come on. Men just stuff it.
Men of color don't.
Really?
Men of color. As Latino and Black families, we don't tell people our business. We just keep it to ourselves.
You know what? I had a friend today pull me aside at the gym, and he's from Iran, Muslim background, right? And he goes, can I ask you a question? And he was like really nervous. And he goes, there's some things that I want to share that I've done that I really regret, some secrets.
Yeah.
He goes, do you think it would be okay to share that with somebody? That's what he asked me.
Right.
Because I think what you're saying is there are cultures and there is,
Absolutely.
I think just being as a man, it's almost like, do I keep pushing this down? Because he was talking to me like, if I don't get this out, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Well, how is that connected to mental health?
I just think, like, to your point, when you talk about we just don't go there. First of all, I didn't know anything about vulnerability and being vulnerable and the courage that it takes to be vulnerable, because most of the time we're vulnerable in our families, different ones that cap on us. Are you crazy? You got that thing on the side of your head. And we're like, no, I actually, so I grew up in that kind of system. And it wasn't until I started reading and listening to this woman by the name, I think her name is Brene Brown.
Yeah, I know.
So her work in vulnerability helped me to get to the point where I could even talk about these things that are so personal and so intimate. You know what I mean? Like, nobody wants to, because you feel defective. Yeah. That's part of it, I think.
She has a story that she tells where she says, her main talk has been about vulnerability.
Yes.
She has a story where she goes, a guy came up to her book signing. Have you heard this?
No.
And he says, you talk about men and
oh, yes, vulnerable. I have heard. Yes.
And he says, but you know what happens when men get vulnerable? And then he basically shared, and I don't want to butcher her story, but she has something on Netflix you can watch too.
Yeah.
But essentially being like, there's a reason why men want to look impenetrable.
Well, he was saying that his wife and his daughters would never want to see him be in any other position but the knight in shining armor on the horse coming in to save the day.
Bro, true story. I'm watching a clip on Instagram of a daughter being given away by her dad getting married. And it was a montage of these clips. And I bring my 9-year-old daughter over. She sits on my lap. I watch it with her. I'm not kidding. And when it happens, I couldn't help it. She's sitting on my lap.
Man.
I start crying.
Yes.
I'm not kidding. She looks at me, Keith. She gets up and walks out.
Oh my God.
Doesn't say a word.
Doesn't say anything?
It bothered her so much to see me. And
Daddy's crying.
I'm like, and it was just
nothing.
She was like, I'm out of here. She was so uncomfortable to see me vulnerable.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the world we live in.
Yes, it is. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because I don't think, by the way, yes, I'm a warrior. Yes, I'm going to defend my family. Yes, I'm going to provide. Yes, I'm all of those things. And that's right. And yes, I get beat up from time to time.
Yeah.
Yes, I get nicked. So where do I go to bleed?
Yeah.
Where do I go to get healed?
Yeah.
Who can I talk to? So then we just asphyxiate. We just hold on to it.
That's what I told my buddy today who asked me that. He was so nervous, and he goes, I said, well, what the scripture teaches is that when we confess what's going on to God, he forgives us. But when we talk to each other, he heals us.
Say that.
And so he goes, are you saying that I will find healing if I talk about it? And I'm saying that's exactly what God wants you to do.
So true.
He wants you to be forgiven and he wants you to be healed.
So true.
I said, that's what I said. I said, do you think God wants you to be healed? And he was like, I think so. And I said, then this is his way of doing it.
That's so good.
So let's talk about
gym.
Always.
Come on, man.
Always.
That's my dude.
Yeah.
Come on.
So talk a little bit about how the gym has helped you with your mental health. Talk about if you've experimented, I guess you'd say, with antidepressants or not. I don't know how you say that. And talk to me about, being a Christian and maybe the stigma that's attached to that.
Man, do we have to? Okay, I have to.
And by the way, just disclaimer, like, you are not ready for this conversation.
No.
Whenever I talk about anxiety or depression, people eat me alive because they're like, and they start throwing all this stuff. I'm like, hold on. This is not a podcast where we're two scientists or doctors sitting here. Right. This is a question that came in that we're going to talk about. So don't feel like you got to be, an expert. Just talk about your experience.
I'm not.
But you kind of are, because you are a pastor and you guide a lot of people through this.
Well, yes. In that regard, we guide people through, but I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor, right? But I think what happened, honestly, how did the gym in my sort of mental health journey is I live in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest, and it is dreary and rainy 8 months a year. Yeah. And so we began to see that when the winter months came, I would immediately start tanking and going down. And what happened is I'm a comfort food eater. I eat when I'm emotional. And
Talk about the food. What is it?
Huh?
What do you run to?
Come on, butter pecan, ice cream, chocolate cakes.
You're an ice cream guy?
And I like all kinds of starches.
Really?
Yes. So my health started deteriorating, and my numbers went up, my cholesterol, everything. And so a friend of mine said, hey, man, this is how I stave off some of the things I deal with. Because he was a military guy too, and he said, man, I got PTSD, and sometimes I have to get up and work out, and I got to do different things, and it helps me. And I was like, okay, so we added that. So fitness is a part of it, right? So how do I wrestle with my mental health issues? For me, fitness is a part of that. My health, what I put in my body, and making sure I move my body. Does that make sense?
Do you think it's a spiritual thing?
Oh, I'm sure it's connected spiritually. Everything for us. I mean, for us, everything, there's a world behind the world. It's kind of like the Matrix, right? It's there's this whole other thing going on. And so, yes, there's that. But also there's a responsibility that we have. Faith without works is dead. So there's something we have to do in this battle, as it were. God's not doing it for us. He's doing it with us. And so the idea is like, the next step was my wife. And I think I told you this when we started musing about this. And I said, I think I'm going to get on some antidepressants and just in the winter months. And so I did, and it started helping. I did workouts, I did antidepressants, and then I had vitamin D. And my last piece is, for me, because I'm a spiritual person and Christian, I worshiped. And so that became sort of how I navigated the space. But what was funny to me is when I said, yeah, I'm going to take it for the 8 months, and then the 8 months went, and I was like, man, do you think I should take it any longer? My wife is like, I've been trying to tell you, like, you have 24 hours a day, 12 months a year, you have issues with depression. And Justice, can I be honest?
Yeah.
It made me feel defective. Like I was broken, like I didn't want to accept and acknowledge that I needed this help. And so the challenge is within me, and the whole idea, something's wrong with me. But the truth of the matter is, something's wrong with all of us. We're all broken in some way. And thank God for the resource of medication, doctors, therapy to help us get mended in those ways. So,
do you want to start reading or listening to the Bible, but you have no idea where to start?
I get the question all the time. I don't know the translation. I don't know where to even begin. That's why we made the 21 Days of Momentum Challenge. How many chapters are in the book of John?
21.
1 chapter a day, small podcast episode. You go through all 21 days. You take the challenge. What happens?
I think your life will be different. You will have hope for your day. You will have a security in hearing the voice of God.
So take the 21-day challenge today on the UNcomplicated app. Just look at the link in description or search your app store. I don't know how public you've been with that, but I can tell you there are people that have told me outright, like, if you're a Christian, you know, you should not be worrying because the commandment is don't worry. And then I tell them, okay, let's not use the word worry. Let's use the word overly concerned. Does that change anything for you? Because anxiety.
Semantics, come on. Yeah, I know.
I mean, Jesus struggled with anxiety. Come on. At least the last moments of his death, when he says, I'm anxious, his words, to the point of death. Yes. And that is because the cross was around the corner.
Yeah,
yes. He wouldn't have been human and God if he didn't feel that weight. Right. But what do you do now when you feel the weight? When it's responsibility, when it's expectations on you as a man, or what do you do when you feel the weight? Give us like the uncomplicated version. You said diet and exercise.
Diet, exercise, medication. I think also the therapy piece. So the medication and therapy, and you're like, so for me, talking about those things that were so uncomfortable, because what happens is you just push stuff down in your soul and you just keep functioning. And I think for us in our faith, I think the Lord will let you go for a while and said, no problem, we'll deal with that later. And then at a certain point, he just stops the progress that you're making because he loves you. He wants to dig this stuff out. And I think the challenge is, Justice, quite frankly, is most people, it's painful to heal. Yeah. Like it's funny to me that people say, well, you just go get healed. If you start doing that work, that hurts.
Yeah.
Seriously,
Yeah.
right? It's like, I was playing basketball one time and got my finger dislocated and it was sitting like this when I went to the sideline. And the guy said, give me your hand. And he grabbed my hand and went pop and put it back in. It was
Yeah.
And then it was in and it subsided. So it was a different kind of pain.
Yeah.
It was the pain of healing, not the pain of violation, right?
Yeah. And when you're going to have surgery,
Absolutely.
they pull a scalpel out, they open you up, right? And so, yeah, for sure, there's that initial, I have to have a level of courage initially to take this on.
Right.
And I wonder how many people are watching right now where you're like, man, I've been back and forth.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have what it takes.
Yeah.
How would you encourage them if they're a Christian or if they don't know Christ?
First of all, it is such nonsense. I wish I could find a stronger word to use. It is nonsense to think that the medication, therapy, the things that are readily available to us are somehow against our faith. Like if I had heart surgery, would I go see a heart surgeon?
Yeah.
Of course I would. And we do all the time. We use the resources. All that knowledge comes from the Lord. Yeah. And so why wouldn't he use that as a resource? It's not the source. Obviously, I don't want to be on medication the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. But I thank God that there's a resource and a provision that came from him.
Yeah.
That the enemy somehow is distorting and keeping his people enslaved.
Yeah.
Because I am walking my way into health, right?
Yeah.
Because there's so much in my story and my journey that was hard.
Yeah.
And so instead of trying to warrior up and armor up, it's like, okay, let's take the armor off and let's do some introspection and look inside. And that's just painful and hard.
Family trauma, would you mind sharing a little bit about your story? Because I imagine most of the people watching, they, You're
digging into my stuff,
well, I
man.
mean, we did say the word triggered earlier.
We did.
Right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
that's, people act the way they do for a reason.
Yeah,
right?
I want to be careful how I communicate this because my father, he did the best he could with what he had.
Right.
I didn't know what had happened to him and what his childhood was like until after he was dead. But my dad, I was born in 1966. My dad and my mom had, first relationship. He went off to Vietnam, did 2 tours of service in Vietnam and came home messed up. So now we're on a podcast talking about mental health.
Yeah.
In the 70s, there was no conversation like that at all. And so we didn't know. He was just angry, irritable, violent, could be set off in an instant. And I was just afraid of him. I can remember him being physical with my mom. And but let's think about him for a minute. He's a black man in the 70s, in the shadow of the civil rights movement, coming back from an unpopular war, dealing with all of the stuff that he had seen, trying to get jobs and all of that. So now, as a man looking back in retrospect, I have empathy and love and compassion for him. But for a lot of years, I was angry and bitter and resentful of him. And so that part of my story is the foundational part. And that's where I think, when you're young and things happen to you, you just start living into that story into a certain degree. And that's what I did for a lot of years.
Do you have a moment where you kind of had that compassion, that empathy break open for your dad? Like where you saw him maybe respond to something and you go, oh, maybe something is happening that I don't understand. Like, do you have a moment like that where you saw him act out of character or something and you're like, oh, Well,
there's something that sort of jarred me and let me know that something was wrong with him. I think somebody in the kitchen dropped like a plate or a cup or something, and he like freaked and dived under the table like a bomb was going off in war.
Yeah.
And so I immediately connected. I'm like, oh, he still thinks he's under fire. Yeah. But I was a little boy. I didn't know what to do it. And so I didn't know what to do with that information. And so I'm trying to read the adults and read the culture of my family, and it was just hard. Yeah. It was really hard. It scarred me in some ways.
I was just asking because I think like we all have that moment where we all of a sudden see our parents as human.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, so I
appreciate that. Yeah. And it did humanize his struggle for me. Now as a man looking back, and even as you mentioned that, it kind of makes me emotional because he never really got free from that. He spent a lot of his life because he couldn't work in spaces. He couldn't work with people really like that. So he was a truck driver, long haul, and that's where he died. He died out on the road. They found him. He had a diabetic seizure, a diabetic coma. He went in, and went down off of an embankment. And it was like days before they found the truck because they started looking for him because he didn't arrive with the load.
How old were you when this happened?
I was 30.
And you got a phone call.
And I got a phone call. Your dad's been missing, and they found him.
Oh, my gosh.
Exactly. Another trauma.
Yeah.
No closure, no conversation. I wrote him a letter sometime before that and just was telling him my experience and that I had hurt and was angry and bitter. I told him everything, and that I loved him and that I was sorry for how I had felt all those years because the Lord was doing something in my heart.
When did you start following Jesus?
I was in the Marine Corps, my second enlistment. My wife and I had been married, having some trouble. Go figure, all that trauma you bring in to the relationship. And so she gave her life to the Lord and basically said, bro, you better get right or you're going to get left, right? Like that.
That's awesome.
So she came home and laid it down, but in a nice way. She was like, we just can't.
How old were you?
Early 20s.
So it took you a few years. I mean, I think sometimes we forget that, like, Jesus saves us, but the healing takes process. Like, instantaneously, we're born again, but we have to grow, you know? And so I would imagine 6-7 years before you're able to write a letter to your dad.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And there was some sort of gift that of being able to process that and do that before he passed away. Right. Even though it wasn't the closure, that's still pretty amazing that you got to that point of writing him a letter.
I think that was
because how many people carry a lot of bitterness, you know?
And again, like people, I think they misunderstand forgiveness.
Yeah.
Like forgiveness is not for you.
Right.
It's for me because I always say it this way. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison, expecting somebody else to die. Literally, my relationships die. Something dies inside of me with that unforgiveness because it then gets carried into bitterness. And here we go, right? Yeah. So, and that's all. And here we go with the mental health stuff. So all this stuff is backing up again relationally. So yeah, 100%.
I mean, I ask because what I'm about to say, I mean, I think, you know, I get in trouble every time I say this. Okay. And people really, they eat me alive for this. I'm serious.
Okay. Here we go.
How much of the anxiety or how much of the, I don't know how to say it, the struggle that we feel internally, I'll just say that, can come from, number one, realizing that we have done things that have hurt other people. We've done things that have hurt ourselves. What's that called? Sin. That we're sinners.
And we can't do anything with it.
Yeah.
But give it away to Jesus.
Yeah. Yes. How much comes from like, wow, if I'm not a Christian yet, like you're watching this, you're not a follower of Jesus, you deep in your heart, you got to realize, man, I was created for a purpose. I'm not living up to it. True. You know, I'm defying a good God who made me with intention, and I'm not living his intention, right? I'm doing things that hurt God's people, including myself, right?
Not trying to, in search of, just doing the best I can.
It's just we're born selfish, and we're born at a disadvantage. So there's that problem, which I would think would cause mental health. Like you could go crazy thinking about that, right?
Yes.
I hate to say that, use that word, but then also maybe the unforgiveness piece, companioned with, partnered with this idea that like, you've done something to hurt me. I won't let it go.
Right.
You've done something against me, right? And I won't forgive. I'm going to hold it in. I'm going to keep drinking the poison. Right. You go enough years like that, not forgiving your dad, not forgiving your mom.
It shows up.
Not forgiving your former boss, right? Not forgiving your brother or sister. And then realizing like, who am I to be withholding forgiveness from anybody when I'm just as bad as everybody else? I think that would, I hate to say it, but it'll drive somebody crazy.
Yeah. Two things. We're pastors and we recognize it. And we just so everybody knows, we know our limitations and we know our lane. And we recognize that there's a continuum for people with mental health issues. There's chemical imbalances and all of these things. So he's not saying that relationships is why we have mental health issues. I just want to land that.
Yeah.
And I completely agree with what you're saying. So much of my family trauma was still living. There's a book called The Trauma something. The Body Keeps Score.
Yep.
It is a book about trauma. It is not a Christian book, by the way. Not written by a Christian. But it talks about the cumulative effect of having all of this stuff in your soul. And it doesn't go away. And here's what really began to get me. My father, what really gave me empathy looking back toward him is when I had children.
Yeah.
And raising them the best way I could, making mistakes. It immediately created empathy and compassion for his struggle. Yeah. And as I asked my grandmother about his upbringing, let's just say whatever I thought I didn't get, he got less than that.
Wow. Yeah.
So, yeah, so it's one of those things. I remember our good friend Angie Ritchie saying about mental health. She said, listen, it is not your fault what happened to you. It's not your fault, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's the family of origin story, whatever that is, it's not your fault. But it is your responsibility to heal.
Yeah.
That's your responsibility. Yeah. And so what moved me past the sort of family, we don't tell anybody, it's like kind of like the mafia code, we keep it all in the family.
Yeah.
What moved me past that was the fact that I recognized that I was passing on this to my children.
Oh, wow.
That I was showing up.
When did that hit you?
My son. My son, good grief. Why are you doing this to me? I need a drink.
Yeah.
I took my son when he was 3-ish back to Baltimore. He used to cry. He was so sweet when he was a little boy, big old cheeks. He used to cry anytime he thought he disappointed me. So like you could never discipline. It's like, Keith, don't do that. Hey, man, stop doing that. And he would immediately start crying.
Oh, man.
So he was so sensitive, right? So when he came, we took him back home, and so he cried over something. I was like, man, come here, buddy. Like, stop crying. And he cried like that, crying. And my grandmother, so think Medea. I know that's a character.
Medea?
Think Medea. Big breasts, big knees, sweet as pie. She wasn't Medea, but she was sweet on the other side. She was Medea the other way. And so she looked with no teeth, in the kitchen.
Oh, my gosh.
She's like, he just like you was.
He just like you was?
And I had been in the Marine Corps. I had lived. I had locked tears away. I didn't cry. What are you talking about?
Wow.
And that was the first inkling that I had that I was a person that I wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
That something along the way had altered me, and I needed God.
Wow.
Because I couldn't do it.
Wow.
To restore what was broke.
Man. Well, you've given us a lot to think about. We've talked about really the challenges of anybody who's been experienced so much trauma.
We could do this for 2-3 hours.
Yeah.
Right?
What are you going to do with it? That's really like, I think I would go so far as to say step one is like recognizing that there's something to take on here. Like if you are in a battle, you got to almost decide if you're going to go to war. You got to
Can I just say, the hardest thing was what you just said, acknowledging and getting out of denial.
Yeah.
I actually needed help.
Yeah.
Like I had run into something that I couldn't lift off of me.
Yeah.
And I needed help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we had more time, I'd talk about my circle too, but I've also, faced this too. Yeah, but we're out of time, so we can't go into that. We can't go.
Great.
But
put me on the spot. It's okay.
That's why you flew in for today.
I flew in for this.
I live here. Okay.
I feel stripped and naked right now.
You're so exposed. I think a lot of people will find a lot of help in here. Number one, saying, hey, I realize that even though I'm a Christian, I can still look to doctors for help. Right? Yeah. I think that alone is worth talking about. What would you talk to this camera right here, and talk to the one who's not a Christian, and then because that's most of our listeners, and then talk to the one who would say, hey, I am a Christian, and they're saying this. I realize I have something to deal with here, and I'm losing my mind figuring out what to do, and I'm a little bit discouraged.
Yeah.
Will you just encourage them before we end?
Yeah,
just look at that camera right there and talk to them like it right into their heart.
First of all, that resonates with me. That's where I was. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to acknowledge. I didn't know who to talk to or where to go. And somebody said, you need therapy. And I'm like, I ain't going to talk to a therapist. I'm going to tell somebody my problems, that kind of thing. But here's what I know. When the pain reaches a certain level in our lives, you cease to care about the discomfort of going to get help.
Wow.
They always say when you go to the doctors, strip down to your level of comfort. And it's like, I'm good with my clothes on, bro. But I had to get in there and I had to strip down. And what I realized is once I crossed the threshold and started, it was so much easier every session after. But we just peeled back layers of pain in my life and started dealing with them. And so you don't have to be a person of faith like me. Therapy can help anybody. And I think the community that you could have around you could be a support too. Because I got good friends. Yeah. I've got a therapist.
Bro, we've been there for each other during our low moments for 15 years.
Yes.
You've called me on Sunday mornings. I've called you.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to.
Like, nobody knows that pastors can get up on a Sunday morning,
bro.
be depressed, discouraged,
not
and
want to
need
get out
help.
of bed.
Right.
Yeah.
I've gone to the pulpit.
I remember me being on the couch, not wanting to get up, and Maria calling you, being like, there's something wrong with my husband.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, as it relates to Christians, I mean, there's just erroneous theology. That's all I can tell you. That says somehow medicine is contrary to our faith. It is not. And the idea that God would give us a resource that could help bring healing and restoration in our life and help our quality of life, and we not avail ourselves to it, that's diabolical. That is the enemy once again stealing, killing, and destroying our lives and God's given us something to counter the brokenness of this world that now has infected our own souls. And Jesus has a remedy. It is Jesus. It is faith plus works. And so the idea is that I can have Jesus, medication, therapy, and community to help me get through what I'm going through.
Thanks for keeping it uncomplicated, my guy.
Appreciate it.
Worth the wait. Season 3 was worth the wait.
It's good to be here. Thanks.